And while it's been fairly tough times to be a Huddersfield Town fan of late, things definitely seem to be on the up for Bradford City. They're hoping to continue their unbeaten start to the season with a trip to Mansfield Town. It means a return to his former club for hat-trick hero Andy Cook after that 4-1 demolition of Stevenage on Tuesday night. I've been catching up with Bradford City fan Phil Ideson, who's following the Bantams from afar. He's over in Florida. He's also half of the Hard Truth podcast, which he hosts with the outspoken Peterborough chairman Darragh MacAnthony, never one who is backwards at coming forwards. It's a good listen, and you get a bit more of an insight into what's going on behind the scenes, what it's actually like to be a football club chairman. And it gives you a bit of an insight as to what it's like dealing with players, dealing with agents, all of that kind of stuff that doesn't always get into the public domain. It does on this podcast. I caught up with Phil Ideson earlier on and I asked him how pleased he's been with City's start to the season.
It's been a great start to the season. I think that it's really started with mindset. There was something that Derek Adams said after the Exeter game where I think we were all really happy we got a 0-0 draw there. And he came away saying, we should be expecting a lot more than that. And I think that's a different mindset from being a City fan over the last 2 or 3 years, where you go hoping versus going and expecting. And I think that's really driving a lot of what we're seeing at the moment. And it's just a real positive for me.
Did you, in your heart of hearts, expect it to have gone quite this well, given the change in manager and given there's been a big turnover of players as well?
Not really. I mean, there's been positive signs in pre-season, but, pre-season often means nothing when it comes to the first day of the season. The game at Stevenage, against Stevenage on Tuesday, I mean, it felt like that's the best performance we've had in 2-3 years. And so that makes you think, maybe this is real and that we are onto something, because it feels like just a lot of the pieces are kind of connecting in place. And I'm trying not to get too optimistic because we've had so many kind of false starts before, but it does feel like it's been a great start.
And the feel-good factor is definitely there. An absolutely huge attendance back at Valley Parade, selling out away tickets as well. How much are you missing being there because you are having to support from further afield at the moment?
Yeah, I miss it all the time. I've been 15, 16 years outside the country now, living in the States. And I get to watch all the games. I watch on iFollow and listen to the commentary. So I feel like I'm connected. But there's nothing like being there. So I'll be back in 2 weeks or so. So I've already got, 2 or 3 games hopefully lined up that I'm coming to, and I'm really, really looking forward to those.
Excellent. How is your love with Bradford City? How did that come about in the first place?
Yeah, it really through my mum. My mum supported the club, when I was a kid. I kind of had the choice of, do I become a Bradford supporter or do I become a Liverpool supporter? That was kind of the 2 teams in my family. And perhaps always being after the underdog. I think I went to a Liverpool game and they won something like 5 or 6-0. And I went to a Bradford game and we lost at home 5-1 or something. And, the underdog in me went with Bradford. And that was 1984, 85 was when I first started watching. I went to a few games. We had the Fire, unfortunately, was there as like my 3rd game. But then when we came back to Valley Parade, we had season tickets since. And, just everything that we went through, I think, created a really strong bond between the club and the city. I was kind of hooked. And so been going ever since.
How do you explain this affiliation then to your friends and colleagues out in the States? Are they still a little bamboozled by what your love of Bradford City is all about?
Yeah, it's funny. Mostly it's who is the question that I get when I try and explain who I support. There'll be occasions when we've had the big wins over the last few years where you get in the limelight for a little while. But most of the time when you come across folks, they're, always watching the Premier League. And that's really the only point of reference that folks have in the States. I think they understand the passion with sport because, there's still a lot of passion over here for different sports. But I have to do a lot of explaining about who Bradford City are.
And it also makes it slightly funny, this connection with the podcast that you're also involved with, The Hard Truth. How on earth did this come about? Because it's yourself and the Peterborough chairman, Darragh MacAnthony,
yes.
Which seems like a very odd combination of people. So tell us the background to that.
It's funny, in my professional life, about 5 or 6 years ago, I started hosting a podcast in the procurement space, which is what I do from a day-to-day basis, and was really fortunate to build that into something that was really big in our niche. So I was into podcasting I was out, I think, on a run last year, and I listened to Darragh, who started his own podcast. And I thought, you know what, maybe I could add something to that, or help, or bring some structure to it, just based on my passion for football and my experience with podcasting. And so I just reached out to him. He lives like 10 minutes down the road from me here in Central Florida. And so we connected and decided, let's do something and put it together. And that was really the start of the podcast. So we didn't really know each other. We got to know each other fairly quickly. And now it's a lot of fun. It's like talking to your mate about what's going on behind the scenes that you don't often get to see.
He is a real character and a very outspoken chairman. Is there a fine line, you think, between sharing too much and not sharing enough? Fans want to know what's going on ultimately, but sometimes is it maybe better to dial it back in a little bit?
I think sometimes it puts you on a platform to be a target, when you do share too much. Because I do think there's something to be said for not necessarily knowing what's going on behind the scenes versus knowing too much about what's going on behind the scenes. And it sometimes changes kind of your view of things when you understand, what's going on with certain negotiations with players and agents and their perspectives and things like that. He obviously is somebody who wants to share what's going on and kind of open the doors to the world of football behind the scenes, and also perhaps, find how he can use that to help him in his transfer dealings and the profile that he has at Peterborough United. I think it's unusual, a lot of the things that he talks about publicly that most of the chairmen probably wouldn't go into.
It certainly makes for a very entertaining podcast, that's for sure. From your conversations and getting to know him a little bit better, would you ever fancy being a football chairman?
That's a funny question. I think my dream would always be to have some kind of role with Bradford City, and have a successful business and to be able to come in with all the money to do all the things that I'd love to do with the club. So it's always kind of an ambition. I see from Darragh is oftentimes you can't win, because he's been very successful with Peterborough United. They're a relatively small club in the grand scheme of things, and they're now in the Championship. And I fully expect them to be doing well in the Championship, not fighting relegation this year. And for the size of the crowds they have, that's a fantastic achievement. But it only takes one bad result, which they got the first day of the season, and his social media is full of people, not being particularly complimentary. And I think that just goes to the territory. I think you've got to be really thick-skinned if you want to get into that, because there's a lot of rough that comes with the good times.
The great thing about it is that because of your Bradford City affiliations, your podcast tends to swerve towards that direction as well. Is that always a bit of an ambition to get as much or as many Bradford City references in there and conversations as you can?
Yeah, it's funny. I tease Darragh sometimes that the more Bradford City conversations we have, the more folks will have listening. It's always interesting to get somebody else's perspective. Given the perspective that he brings as an outsider to Bradford City, but of knowing the football industry and knowing some of the characters that are involved, it's fascinating for me to be able to kind of get to hear what he thinks as somebody who's in that privileged position, but that's not directly involved. So it's good fun for me to be able to talk as much about City as I possibly can in the pod.
It is very early days for Bradford. And I've actually been talking to Darragh Adams today. He's again been very much downplaying the expectation. Look, ultimately he says we get judged after 46 games at the end of the season. From what you've seen, do you kind of have that quiet confidence that this might be the season to get out of what is ultimately a very difficult league to escape?
Yeah, I think that, so Darragh and I have talked a little bit about that on the podcast as well, that League Two this season is a relatively weak league. What Darragh Adams brings is kind of a system, and the system that kind of values the process, if you will, over individual ability of the players. And so I think what we've seen so far is I'm really optimistic by it. I think that everything feels right. Everything feels right for a promotion push. But we've seen that we'll go on these, like we had last year. We had such highs with the runs and such lows with bad runs that we may be sat here in a month's time lamenting the fact that we haven't won in 4 games. So I don't want to get too carried away, probably like Darragh Adams would say in his press conference. But I feel like all the pieces are in place. it's not a particularly tough league. I think the fans being back is going to make such a huge difference for the motivation of the players that now is as good a chance as ever to get back out of this league, I think.
And we'll hopefully see you at Valley Parade in the not too distant future if you're heading back over to the UK. Just how much are you looking forward to setting foot back inside the stadium again?
Yeah, it kind of gives me goosebumps thinking about it. Just really want to be there and be, seeing the crowds in again. And it always feels like home, whenever I step foot into Valley Parade. So, and maybe this time, unlike previous years, they'll actually give me something to cheer about when I get there.
Really lovely to speak to Bradford City fan Phil Ideson following the Bantams from out in Florida. And do check out the podcast, The Hard Truth, with him and Darragh MacAnthony, the Peterborough chairman. It's a good listen.